In this lesson, we're going to take a look at adding a little bit of random chaos to our scene now we've got our models in place. So things such as the walls and the floor. I've changed the colors of the floor just so I can separate them and see them easier. So this is our floor object that we made, the wooden planks. I've gone through and I've tidied up the edges of our hexagonal tiles so everything lines up. There's no intersecting geometry. We can unisolate those. I'm happy with these. I think with bump maps and textures I can add a little variation to these. I want them all to be slightly different colors to match this reference, so that'll add a bit of randomness to it itself. But for the wood, I think there's only so much you can do with textures. Obviously you can add variation into the reflectivity, to the glossiness, to break up the wooden, the individual planks. And obviously we can use multi-texture to add variations of saturations and hues and gamma. But I think the model needs to have that little bit of extra detail itself. So this is just a quick tutorial to show how I sometimes go about that. Depending on project, whether it's commercial or personal, it can just depend on what size and what scale of scene it is, whether I do this or not, or how close I'm going to be to the floor. For this particular tutorial, the floor is going to be a focus of a couple of shots. I'm going to be quite close in the foreground, so for this project I deemed it necessary. The first thing that I done was subdivided the mesh. 40 might be a bit much for some people. You can put it in at 100. You can just get basic subdivide on there. I've also split the model, the floor model, off into two separate pieces. Whilst we're still going to see this part of the floor in the distance, say the camera looking down the hallway, it's not going to be in the foreground. Only these two rooms are. So to save geometry, polygon count, split that off and we can leave it as is. And we'll just work on this this front area. So as I said, I added a subdivide. I put it down to 40. Just gives me more room to work. Obviously you can put the poly count high. It's up to you what you want to do. This is just my personal approach. And then I added some noise. Quite subtle. Hopefully you can just see it picking up when I turn it on and off. You'll just see the slight deviation in surface. This is something that I just played with. I always put it to 10 and 10, and then have a look at the scale. Does it need to be bigger? Does it need to be smaller? We can put it in as much as you want. Obviously it doesn't need to be that rough, so I thought a scale of 100 was fine. Obviously this is a little bit too much, so I put it back down to 2 mil, and that just gives me a nice light little bit of variation. Subtle, it doesn't need to be noticeable, just this tiny, see the slight warps in the gaps and the slight warp you get there. It just it's something that your eye won't necessarily be drawn to at the beginning, but you might notice isn't there if it's not there. And then this actually can create issues because we're not turbo smoothing these. That does actually create faceted geometry, which will show up in your reflection maps and stuff, and your reflection elements. It can be quite problematic when you get to post and you realize that your render elements have actually got weird triangles in them, and it's because of the subdivide and the noise. So the next thing to do is stick a smooth and just auto smooth, switch that on, and that just takes away the faceted element and keeps it as is. The UVW map on top of this is actually something we're going to come to in later lesson when we're talking about texturing, but that's just something that's going to add more variation by using different mapping channels. Now we can go through the hex tiles. I'm going to leave, as I said, but the walls, the internal walls and the exterior walls, I want to do the exact same thing. I want to subdivide these I actually, for these, just to keep the viewport running clean, what I generally tend to do is once I've done something like this with the floor and I've made it extremely high polys, I just freeze the layer because it just makes it a lot easier to run inside. And a similar trick for keeping it speedy in the viewport as well is on things like the walls, where there's obviously quite a few of them. You know, eventually I can go through and delete this area that I don't need, but for now we'll keep it there just in case. When I subdivide these, I just turn display subdivision off. Obviously if I switch it on, you'll see that it's quite a highly subdivided mesh. As I say, for commercial projects this won't always be viable because it's a very high poly count, it adds to render times. But this isn't a commercial project, this is just little things that I do to make my work better if possible. Although the commercial projects we do at the moment, it is viable because they're generally quite small areas, you know, just kitchens, bathrooms and bedrooms. So I don't have to worry about huge master plans and blocks of apartments. You know, I'm doing 1-2 rooms maximum, so this is usable. So we stick the subdivide on there at 75. It's quite a high subdivide. I can turn the display off, keeps the viewport running, and then we'll stick some noise on. Now I've put 2 layers of noise on this because whilst it gives a bit of variation, just having one noise on there, you can actually see in the viewport that it is just simple noise. It's kind of that simple repetitive wave. It actually looks a bit CG. It makes it look CG. This, even though it's not a flat surface, you're making it look more CG because you've exaggerated that you're using a standard noise map. So I always put 2 on. I'll stick another one on top of that with just a lot simpler, or a lot smaller, sorry, fractal effect, and then we just stick an auto smooth on that, and that should just give me some nice smooth variation in the wall. You know, you can see it here, it's subtle. But you know, that'll pick up little highlights and little specular highlights once we've textured that, and it's just another one of those things that adds to the realism of the scene, I think. And we've put the same instanced modifiers on the rest of the geometry too, so we have it on all of our internal walls, and yeah, hopefully it won't be too high poly for you all and cause too many render issues, but it's just another little thing that definitely improves the realism of a project. So hopefully that helps.